Welcome to CannaBiz with Canna-Chris. I'm Chris Nanny, also known as Canna-Chris, and today we'll be talking about the dangers of non-compliance. I'm with my co-host, Austin Slutsky.
Man, do we have a great episode today, Chris.
Oh, yes, we do. And today we'll be bringing on an attorney to walk us through compliance and hopefully get a few stories out of him, too. But hey, let's get started. What's going on in cannabis today?
So we have 2 new bills being proposed in New Mexico. That would legalize adult use cannabis. Both bills will have taxes on the marijuana, and neither one would have sales tax for medical cannabis. But other than that, there's some big differences between the two.
Okay, so what are some of the differences?
The main difference is in the bill coming out of the House of Representatives, it would allow adults to grow their own cannabis as long as they get license from the state. And this license would not be anywhere close to the license we see for major grow ops in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would be much more manageable for an individual looking to grow cannabis in their own home. In addition, it would also have language to expunge arrest and conviction records for certain marijuana cases. And then the bill has an amendment in it. Make sure that employers can still have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to their workers.
You know, I'm a really big fan of the House's version already. You have home grow in there, which is a big thing, especially for all the grassroots movements out there. And they're helping, give back to society by giving some of these expungements to these non-violent cannabis possession crimes.
Yeah, and even though that committee clawed back and put in that zero tolerance policy, it's not unheard of and it's pretty standard with what you see in a lot of other states.
Okay, and then what about the Senate?
So the Senate has none of that. Basically, it lacks the expungement. There's nothing about personal grow. More than likely, it would have the same sort of no tolerance policy regarding workers because it seems to be on the more conservative side of legislation.
Okay, and final question, I promise. For New Mexico, do you think it's going to pass?
At this point, don't really know. We'll have to see what the final bills look like when they finally come through.
Okay, well, hey, I got some interesting news for you. A little bit up north, a little further than you might think.
What, like Montana?
Even further north than that. It's in Alaska, one of the only few states that don't touch the continental U.S. So Alaska's governor just recently made a proposal that would transfer the compliance oversight from an elected board of the cannabis industry to a governor-commissioned board.
So what kind of impact would having a governor-appointed board have compared to an elected officials?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So the trade industry, they've alleged, I guess you could say, that the governor would be picking favorites and he would have a greater control over who's on the board. Potentially, these elected board members could sway the compliance oversight committee in Alaska, so there could be spotty inspections. They could under-enforce fines for some while increasing some for others. They could even increase fines specifically for one violation that they know one business does a lot. There's just room for tons of litigation coming from this. And so recently, the trade association has been fighting back. In February, they went and spoke in front of about 50 legislators on the topic, kind of trying to convince them of their side and that the governor is doing a power grab with this move.
I mean, I could totally see that. All the cherry picking of potential regulations and fines, and especially when you have all the power to appoint the board, I could totally see this power being abused. Whether it goes that way or not has yet to be decided as of now.
Yeah, and a final note on that topic, the governor has come back to some of these critiques, and his counter statement has been that the state right now has a $1.6 billion deficit, and he's just doing his job as governor and trying to reduce that.
Well, at least he's trying to put his best foot forward and do what he can to lower the deficit. But I do have some great news coming out of the first county to finish their automated expungement.
Ooh, who's that?
So San Francisco has now expunged over 9,000 of their previous marijuana convictions. About 1,200 were done over the previous months, and 8,000 were done very recently. And so what this does is basically cuts through all the bureaucratic red tape that typically comes with expunging. There's a lot of fees, a lot of filing, and San Francisco teamed up with a nonprofit organization called Code for America, and they use Clear My Record technology, which is an algorithm designed to basically identify any cases that could be eligible under the expungement provisions and then kind of streamline the process to make sure that these people get their fair shake without having to deal with all the excessive fees and timelines that typically hold people back.
I'm really glad you brought that up because actually a few episodes ago we had Roz McCarthy on and she was speaking about diversity. One of the biggest things that's hurting people getting back into the industry is having prior convictions. And so expungements may be one of the most significant things in any, local program in helping people get back into the industry.
Yeah, it's really great seeing San Francisco do this, and especially because they're paired with a nonprofit organization that's using, a data-driven technology, means that it's easily to replicate, and they could send it out into other counties as well, maybe full states, and then we could see a lot more expungements coming in the future.
Thanks for updating us on what's happening in cannabis, Austin. For all of our listeners, make sure to like and subscribe. Up next, we're bringing on our cannabis attorney to walk us through compliance. Coming on to our show today, we have attorney at law and fellow cannabis advocate, Todd Levitt. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Hey guys, I am just stoked to be here on CannaBiz with Canna-Chris. How you guys doing?
We're super excited to have you on today, talking about compliance and how to get people to avoid the pitfalls in their regulations.
Yeah, so let's kick it off. Can you tell me why compliance matters and what do businesses have to comply with?
Okay, so just a little bit of quick background info for the listeners. I am a criminal defense attorney practicing out of the middle of the mitten. I'm from Michigan, and for those of you who do not reside in Michigan, if you look at the state of Michigan, we look like a hand, a mitten, and I practice in the middle of the state. And my law firm is Levitt Law Firm, attorney Todd L. Levitt. I've always been a defense attorney, and in Michigan in 2008, the Medical Marijuana Act passed, which allowed for medical marijuana, and then this past November 2018, Michigan became the first Midwest state to go recreational. 2 years prior to 2018, there were certain bills and laws that were passed in the state that set everything up, and what the governor at the time, Governor Snyder in Michigan, did was he appointed a marijuana board that consisted of 3 Republicans, I believe, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent. He was a Republican governor, Governor Snyder. So the marijuana board was empowered to oversee and draft all the new rules and regulations that were to govern the industry, including compliance, which is of the utmost importance. I am a criminal defense attorney. I've always been a defense attorney handling any and every type of misdemeanor offense, felony offenses. Michigan is a recreational state, the first one in the Midwest. I've always defended individuals and their constitutional rights against the government in regards to illegal search and seizure under the 4th Amendment, self-incrimination under the 5th Amendment. In 2008, when Michigan became a medical marijuana state and allowed for card holders and caregivers to participate in, marijuana programs, there were so many gray areas that I found myself filing motions, just, fighting the good fight as we watched these cases go from the trial court all the way through the Court of Appeals and eventually to the Michigan Supreme Court.
Yeah, so for you, it was a pretty easy transition to going from criminal work into kind of doing compliance for businesses and individuals?
That's correct. I have been involved in everything from drafting ordinances for the townships in Michigan to opt into the new Michigan Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. I have represented individuals who sought pre-approval through the state of Michigan to obtain licensing and so on and so forth. If you're not complying of the law, then you're going to be shut down. You're going to face both civil penalties and possible criminal prosecution. So it's out there. I know you have listeners from all over the country and all over the world. Make sure, first and foremost, you have a good attorney who's assisting you in complying with statutes and regulations put forth from the state.
Wow, that's some heavy stuff right there. You mentioned civil and criminal penalties or fines for non-compliance. So can we just take a step back real quick and kind of go over what compliance is? What do these businesses have to comply with?
Well, in Michigan, and you can relate this to around the country, prior to the state of Michigan allowed certain dispensaries to stay open as long as they had regulations, emergency regulations that were put in place. In Michigan, if you are one of those covenant businesses who have obtained a license to open a dispensary, testing, grow facility, transportation, you are required, first and foremost, to have software that is connected to the state system. You are required to have certain security apparatuses placed in your facilities. You are required, if you're a grow facility, to follow not only state, but also federal rules and regulations in regards to waste treatment. You are required to follow employment regulations and work in your local business, who's handling, various cannabis products. Dozens and dozens of compliance rules and regulations that you must follow at any time. If law enforcement, and this is what I don't agree with, or the local level to do an inspection, you have to waive your 4th Amendment right and allow them into your facility to inspect your books, to interview your employees, to basically, as far as I'm attorney, violate your darn constitutional rights because, there's no privacy, and that's something that I've railed on my own podcast, the Todd Levitt Marijuana Law Podcast. So if you do not comply, the state's going to send you a cease and desist order, and if you don't cease and desist in the cannabis industry, then you could be, face serious felony charges for, illegal distribution and manufacturing charges. Most businesses that I come in contact with have attorneys that guide these business owners through the various compliance levels, and that's the job of an attorney in many aspects, is to make sure, if you specialize in cannabis law, to make sure your clients are complying with all the rules and regulations of the state.
What should people really do as they're getting into the industry? Why should they be concerned about complying with these regulations?
Well, number one, in order to get into the industry in the first place, it takes a lot of investment, time. There's men and women who are putting their houses up. They're selling stock. There's a lot invested in all facets of this industry. If you're not in compliance, you're going to lose your license to participate in the industry, and then everything that you sacrifice is going to be up, pun intended.
We'd like to remind all of our listeners to like, subscribe, and share this episode. We also love reading your comments, so feel free to leave us some down below.
Welcome back to CannaBiz with Canna-Chris. I'm Chris Danny, and today we have Todd Levitt talking to us about some compliance issues. So, Todd, what experiences have you had with businesses that are not so well versed in regulations?
Well, I am a criminal defense attorney, and a number of entities who are participating in Michigan's recreational program. And one of the key non-compliance issues that I face as an attorney is the state of Michigan is requiring or has required that dispensary owners purchase all their product from licensed growers. But the problem is, and has been, that the state was lacking in getting these growers licensed, and the dispensaries ran out of product across the state of Michigan. So still purchasing their product from licensed caregivers. The experience I've had is they've been shut down. In the state of Michigan, dispensaries are now required to purchase their product from growers. The problem is the licensed growers have yet to go to harvest, and they can't supply the demand around the dispensaries around the state of Michigan. So there were a number of dispensaries that were still getting their product from caregivers as opposed to the licensed growers in the state of Michigan. Dirty products. That's been a problem, putting out warnings through LARA, which is Michigan License and Regulatory Affairs, that oversees the entire marijuana licensing process in Michigan. Dispensaries are now required to purchase product from licensed growers and have their product tested at state-regulated testing facilities. We're finding now that dispensaries around the state, not a lot, but a handful, are having product removed from their shelf, warnings sent out to the public. Products were found to be in non-compliance. The biggest issue is products not meeting the standards. Dirty products. And nobody wants to go into a dispensary and buy dirty product to begin with.
Yeah, I've heard of similar issues in states like California, who their current emergency licenses are expiring. So every month there are hundreds, if not thousands, of growers losing their license. Dispensaries can no longer have product to sell. And so there's going to be a potential shortage in California in the next 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Michigan's considered the second largest marijuana consuming state outside of California. We have over 300,000 medical marijuana card holders, and we're a recreational state, and the medical is still growing. The dispensaries in the state of Michigan are required to purchase from growers, as I said earlier, and the issue is the growers are not yet up to harvest, and the state of Michigan has lagged behind in getting these growers licensed to start producing the product that the public demands. There's such a demand that, nothing can happen fast enough here in the state of Michigan right now.
So what's Michigan doing? Are there any proposals right now? Is there any legislation? How are they trying to fight this?
Now, what's taken place is we have a new governor who's come into place and who has reappointed some of these individuals who have more experience in licensing. So it's speeding up the process. What's happened is the state of Michigan has allowed emergency rules to be put in place whereby dispensaries for a period of time were allowed to purchase from caregivers as opposed to licensed growers. So that's what's taken place. There still has been a huge shortage. And in Michigan, the rules and regulations will not be in place until the end of 2019, whereby any individual 21 and older will be allowed to walk into a dispensary. Right now, only medical marijuana card holders can walk into a licensed dispensary and purchase products.
So you mentioned this briefly, but if you could go back and talk about how, switching from one governor's board to another and some of the changes that you saw in the experience of those appointed to the board when it comes to licensing and some of the benefits that had on Michigan's medical marijuana program and I guess potentially their adult use as well.
So Governor Snyder, I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'm an American. I say this on my own podcast all the time. And Governor Snyder, who was a Republican, did a lot of great things for the state of Michigan as a defense attorney. He was the one who was present when the Medical Marijuana Act passed. He was the one who was present when it went recreational. Now we have a Democrat who is the governor. Now she was very pro-cannabis. And we have an attorney general who just took office who ran on a platform of pro-cannabis advocacy. So Michigan is in really good shape. And the new governor, appointed an individual individual who had experience in the liquor control industry in issuing liquor control licenses, an establishment that sells alcohol. So now you have somebody in place who understands the rules and regulations and how to speed the process along.
So Todd, we've talked a lot about the negatives of businesses that don't comply with the law or the regulations. What are some of the benefits that aren't just readily apparent to businesses that are actively involved in making sure they stay compliant?
My experience is most businesses are doing their best, if not in compliant, because as I said earlier, there's a lot of money, families invested in these businesses that are now starting to take hold. But the benefits are that they're going to be able to run a thriving business and be part of this amazing industry that we are watching evolve before our very own eyes. I mean, it's really excelled west, but it's also been turning the corner, and the state's coming on board with not only medical but recreational, and eventually, we'll have marijuana removed from the Controlled Substances Act by the federal government. I mean, that's what needs to happen. You really want to know what I think? The government needs to get off their you-know-what and the legislators and remove marijuana from Schedule 1 of Controlled Substance Act to allow people to bank who have these businesses.
So when it comes to highlighting some of the major points that we talked about today, when it comes to regulations and being compliant with them, and so it's really important to maintain compliance, whether that's through consulting or attorneys. It's good to have someone in your ear who can tell you about all of this information you can now then pay off instead of watching your business fall in addition to everything else around you. So Todd, where can people learn more about you and compliance in Michigan?
Todd Levitt. I'm on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Lisbon. I'm on all the different podcasting platforms. Type in my name, Levitt, Todd. The 420 Canna Expo taking place on 420 at the Soaring Eagle Casino and Resort here in the state of Michigan. I'm hosting. For more information, check out 420cannaexpo.com. But also you could just search the Michigan taxation law that Michigan took us recreational. It's called the Prop 2, otherwise known as the Taxation and Marijuana Act.
Yeah, so for all those people out in Michigan or anywhere else in the Midwest, this 420 Expo will be a great opportunity to get some more information and opportunities on how to get in the cannabis space.
Thanks for being on the show, Todd. Really appreciate your legal expertise and knowledge in compliance. For all of our listeners out there, we'd like to remind you to subscribe and share this podcast if you enjoyed our content. I'm Canna-Chris, also known as Chris Nanny.
And I'm Austin Slutsky.
And we'll see you next week.